no right-minded Victorian would look at the machete murder of a 12-year-old and a 15-year-old and think that we shouldn't be yelling from the rooftop that this is not okay and that our city has never been more violent.
People are not going to dine here because they can see the crime.
A major investigation is underway after a terrifying gang fight forced a northern suburbs shopping complex into lockdown.
Armed teenagers have robbed 20 businesses during a violent two-day crime spree across Melbourne.
We have to see someone die in a shopping centre to ensure that we can get the policies and the legislative changes we need to keep Victorians safe.
Australia, the land of sunburned summers, blue coastlines, and people who somehow treat coffee like a religion. It's easy to call it one of the happiest, most easygoing places on earth, but there's one word that might not fit anymore: safe. At least not in its second most populous state of Victoria, or more specifically, Melbourne. What was once perhaps one of the most livable cities in the world has slowly turned into Australia's own Gotham City. And worst of all, it was entirely self-inflicted. It's been a while since I've spoken about Australia, so let's start with a bit of context, because it's hard to understate how bad things have gotten in Melbourne. Victoria recorded nearly 500,000 criminal incidents in the past year alone, an 18% jump, the biggest spike in 2 decades. Car thefts up 41%, the highest level in 22 years. Aggravated burglaries jumped almost 30%. Melbourne has come to be known as the city of machete crime, where it's gotten so bad that the government had to ban them entirely in 2025, something no other state has ever had to do. We'll get to that piece of comedy in a bit. The thing is, it didn't have to be this way. In fact, this was a result of leftist policies passed by Victoria's own rather smug government. It all started with a promise to make the justice system fairer, more compassionate, and less punitive. But like most things that sound good in press releases, the results were the exact opposite. No surprises there, really. In 2023, the Victorian government rewrote the state's bail laws, and not for the better. They scrapped offences for breaching bail, softened conditions for repeat offenders, and even introduced a presumption of bail for children. That meant a 16-year-old could get caught stealing a car on Monday, get bail on Tuesday, and be out doing it again by Friday. In fact, there have been cases where these young offenders were arrested by police, shouting that they would be out and back in the same spot the very next day. Then came the youth justice reforms. In 2024, Victoria became the first state in Australia to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 12. That meant a 10 or 11-year-old could commit a serious assault and police couldn't even charge them. They could take them home, maybe make a phone call to a social worker, and that's it. Younger teens were also pushed away from detention in favour of diversion programs. And unsurprisingly, a new breed of teenage offenders realised they could pretty much do whatever they wanted. And that's exactly what they have been doing, with virtually no consequences. All of this was done under the banner of progress. And for a while, it made politicians and the activist class feel good. They could stand at a podium and boast about reducing incarceration rates and how Victoria now had the lowest prison population in the country, which sounds great until you realise crime was exploding at the exact same time. Less people in jail didn't mean a safer society. Turns out, it just meant more criminals on the street. Now, before we get to the next part, if you enjoyed the video so far, please remember to give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and consider signing up on Patreon, which comes with a ton of perks. Look, the results were immediate and brutal, and contrary to what some might believe, this wasn't some national trend. Many in the champagne socialist side of politics insist this isn't unique to Victoria, and some even proudly claim it's even become safer. But if we look at the facts, crime rates in New South Wales and Queensland held steady. Conversely, Victoria alone went off the charts. Police say the numbers are being driven by a small army of repeat offenders. Just 5,400 people responsible for about 40% of all crime. Of those 5,400 individuals, they committed an average of 35.7 crimes per year, or roughly 1 crime every 10.2 days. If this group was looked at as a collective, Victoria sees one of them commit a crime in the state every 2.7 minutes. Deputy Commissioner Bob Hill summed it up best. We simply cannot allow the level of crime we're seeing to become normalised. But it already has. Every week, there's another story. families woken up by masked teenagers with machetes demanding car keys. Gangs breaking into working class homes in Tarneet, Melton, Craigieburn, hitting multiple houses in a single night. In some cases, the offenders are barely old enough to drive and already have a string of charges. They get arrested and are pretty much out within hours, and mainstream media quite often refuse to report on these incidents. They are part of the cover-up in the country whose government has started a crusade on information online, especially what you see and can say. That's exactly why I use Proton VPN and why I think you should too. They're based in Switzerland, outside the reach of US, EU, UK and Australian law. They don't keep logs and are built by the same team behind Proton Mail. When the UK passed its surveillance laws, Proton VPN became the #1 app on the App Store. Their stealth protocol beats censorship firewalls. Secure Core routes your traffic through privacy-first countries, and NetShield blocks trackers before they ever reach you. I've used Proton Mail since Australia announced sweeping surveillance laws last year, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it's now essential. If you want to protect your privacy and support this channel, hit the link below to get up to 60% off Proton VPN. And often these end up in tragedy. In September 2025, two boys, just 12 and 15, were hacked to death by a group of 8 masked youths. The detective in charge called it one of the most horrific crimes he had ever seen. Ironically, one of the perpetrators involved had made national headlines only weeks earlier, when he was released on bail for a machete fight in the middle of a shopping centre. Unfortunately, this wasn't an isolated case. A respected Melbourne doctor, Dr. Ashley Gordon, was killed in a random carjacking by a man who had already been released on bail despite a violent history. Even the suburbs that once felt untouchable aren't spared. In Doreen, a mother was dragged from her car at knife point while her twin sat in the back seat. In Glen Waverley, a family woke up to intruders armed with machetes. Almost every time, the perpetrators have been released, even for the most violent crimes. It's become a comedic remark that these criminals are already out on bail by the time news of their crimes hit the airwaves. Meanwhile, retail workers are living their own nightmare. Shoplifting has doubled in 2 years. Supermarket staff are being assaulted over bottles of wine and packs of meat. Young Australians just entering the workforce no longer want to work at these places, terrified of being held at knife point. Zooming out, the fallout isn't only personal, it's economic as well. Victoria's insurance claims for theft have risen almost 60% in a year, costing more than $200 million. Premiums are rising, small businesses are shutting, and everyone's paying for crimes they didn't commit. Once again, not surprising in the slightest. The government, off the back of polling and public anger, finally decided to change something, although it's debatable how sincere they are. Premier Jacinta Allen stepped in front of the cameras and admitted what everyone already knew. "We got it wrong," she said. Her government, the same one that softened Victoria's bail laws in 2023, was now promising to make them the toughest in Australia. By March 2025, Labor passed a complete U-turn of its own policy. The new bail reform scrapped the so-called last resort rule for young offenders, reinstated bail breach offences, and introduced automatic jail time for anyone who committed an indictable offence while on bail. Yes, ironically, the same politicians who preached rehabilitation were now threatening mandatory prison terms. Of course, the results haven't been that visible. And that wasn't the only backflip. After a wave of violent knife attacks, the government launched a statewide crackdown on machetes and large blades, banning them outright for the first time in Victoria's history. Police were given new search powers and millions in funding for what they called Operation Alliance. Then came the headline that made the rest of the world laugh: the machete amnesty bins. Oh, this one's pretty good. Ready? Yes, you did mishear me. The state government spent more than $13 million installing special collection bins across the state so people could voluntarily hand in their machetes. As if the same teenagers who were using them to rob stores and break into homes were suddenly going to walk up, drop them in and say, "Sorry about that." Even foreign media outlets couldn't help but mock this plan. It was the perfect metaphor for Victoria's justice policy: expensive, performative, and completely detached from reality. What Victoria attempted was, in essence, a social experiment. The belief that compassion could replace deterrence and that fewer people in prison would somehow mean a safer society. The government called it reform. In practice, it dismantled the few mechanisms that kept repeat offenders in check. While Victoria's imprisonment rate fell to the lowest in Australia, at around 85 prisoners per 100,000 adults, its overall crime rate reached the highest level in 2 decades. Well, of course it did, as all the criminals were out on the streets. The idea behind these reforms wasn't new. Similar soft justice approaches have been tried in parts of the United States and the United Kingdom, where the same pattern emerged: relaxed sentencing, rising crime, and a slow erosion of public confidence. It's a philosophy built on the assumption that crime is purely circumstantial, that with enough social support, punishment becomes unnecessary. Yet history and human behavior say otherwise. Consequences deter, remove them, and you remove the fear that keeps chaos contained. See, I want Victoria to succeed and become safer for everyone, but I also want more people, especially those that are full-fledged soldiers of the Victorian government, to get their heads out of the holes they've dug. It might not impact you personally, but it is impacting numerous people daily. Real people, real consequences. Victoria's leaders wanted moral points, not measurable results. They built a system that protected criminals and punished citizens with fear and higher costs of living. And in doing so, they proved a simple truth that every functioning society eventually relearns. When you remove accountability, you remove safety. And when you protect the offender over the innocent, it's always the public that pays the price.
In the neon haze of a broken dawn, steel towers hum, but the wild runs on. A shadow moves through the circus below, half machine, half beast, with a violet glow. They thought the outback was lost to the flame, but a ding